Okay, folks, crazy world we're living in. Apparently, we're live right now. Welcome, everyone. This right here, right now, is the joy of being a live stream. What's going on? Today is the joy of being a live stream, as always. And we're coming to you live from Brooklyn, New York. And apparently, we also don't have that other text. The other text says where we are, which is twitch.tv/deepmindfulness. Thank you guys for joining. It's delightful to have you here today. We're going to be entering some good news territory. Good news is we're going to be meditating. That's right. Today's meditation day. So welcome, folks. As you begin to trickle in, let me know where it is exactly you're coming from. We have yet again our co-host here with us, Nick. It's a little messy world here. Nick has been kind enough. Nick is actually the longest time subscriber. Yeah, I know. Nick is actually the longest time subscriber here on the Twitch channel. So thank you, Nick. That support is appreciated, as always. So, folks, we are going to begin. Let's see. We're going to begin to do our stream. So, what's up? What's new? What's happening? We're going to do our stream, and I think afterwards we're going to do some more exploration around artwork and the theme of today, which we're still exploring equanimity. And in the equanimity side of things, we're going to be exploring the, in particular, the equanimous self. We've done a little bit of this in the past, but today we're going to be exploring it specifically in terms of its quality of helping with equanimity. Exactly. The only one who's actually growing in meditation is Nick. I know. It's so funny. We have a salty co-host with us. Thank you, Nick, for being here. Thanks for streaming. She says, and yeah, the text is gone wrong. Yeah, it's just gone today. That's what it is today. It'll be fixed soon. You know, it's one of those things, solve one problem, fix the next. Hey, listen, the problem that we solved this time, notice the background isn't blinking. Ho! We did it. We did it, folks. 100 followers, one very lovely subscriber, and of course, our text is gone. Okay, folks. Find yourself a nice, comfortable position, one that you can maintain for the entire duration of the sit. I usually stack my legs in front of each other. I'm going to switch today because I feel like I always do it this way. And that means that I'm growing muscles and stuff in a way that's not symmetrical, which is less than ideal. So I'm switching which leg comes in front. Shinzen told me to make sure to rotate because he never did. And now his foot is weirdly shaped. Forever. Okay, folks, so let's see here. Can I move this sucker? No, I cannot. Okay. All right, folks. Welcome again. Okay, so finding a nice comfortable position you can maintain for the duration of the sit. If somebody else subscribes today, you become the co-host. Or I think if Nick also, what's it called? I think if Nick gift subscribes, then he wins yet another. Nick says, yeah, lots of growing for me to do. Yeah, exactly. Catching up with years and decades. I always sit left on top of right. Yeah, that's Shinzen's foot is so weird, sort of weirdly shaped. He's like, yeah, I just should have started rotating at the beginning. But that's exactly it. The muscles and your legs and hips and everything will start to shape themselves towards that. It's amazing how meditating actually often teaches people all this stuff about their body they didn't know, which is often that their body's a little messed up and they sit still and it's painful and these kind of things. I learned quite a bit about my body through just sitting still. All right, folksies. Finding that nice, comfortable position. And we'll begin. Beginning by taking a few comfortable deep breaths, just feeling the body rise and fall. We're going to use the part of ourselves that doesn't need anything to be different as we move through the body to relax. So notice if we can engage in relaxation without needing something to change. This might seem very subtle, but just notice if that can be found. So starting at the top of the head, allow the brow to relax, the muscles behind the eyes, allowing the face to go smooth. Relaxing the tongue, allowing the jaw to go slack. Relaxing the neck and the shoulders. The upper arms, elbows, forearms, wrists, and relaxing the hands. As we move through the body progressively, noticing if there's some part of us that wants something to change, to be different. And over again, simply noticing this and possibly making the change without needing the change to occur. Letting go of any breath control. Just noticing the natural tightening and relaxing of the upper chest and upper back as the breath comes and goes. Relaxing the belly and the lower back. Relaxing the hips and the upper legs. The knees and calves. The Achilles, the ankles, and relaxing the feet. And as we tune into all of the subtle sensations throughout the body, any pleasant or neutral sensations, seeing if we can do so from the position of not needing them to be different. Noticing that there's often a part of ourselves that does want or need things to be different. Instant by instant, the system will lean towards or away. In some way pushing or pulling against our current experience. So we're simply observing large awareness of the body, mostly neutral or pleasant sensations. Noticing the self that doesn't need it to be different. And if you can't contact that self, noticing that the self we're experiencing does need it to be different. It's not bad. It's just helpful to know. Beginning to balance and know the experience of the breath within this large field of awareness. Simply checking in instant by instant. Is the body-mind grasping for something? Or not? Is there a part of us that's grasping and part that is not? Seeing if we can find that part of the self that doesn't need anything to be different. Noticing if tiny distractions arise. If these distractions are coming from the experience of a self that needs things to be different, or is okay with everything exactly how it is. rebalancing awareness of the body and attention on the breath without needing it to have this balance. Now we're going to make a slight transition, letting go of this balance we've been developing. Coming into the sensory experience of the present moment, whatever it is. Noticing if the volitional self is arising. The part of us that feels like it controls. And in contacting this, it's important that we absorb two qualities. One is that this part that feels that it controls, that it guides our body movements, that it makes our decisions, that its nature is that it feels like it's pulling, like it's wanting. So simply to notice this force in the body and the mind. And it's also important to know that this force is perfectly natural. It's not bad or good. It's simply an arrangement. Its own force. Noticing that if we accept this force as it is, it can sometimes feel less sticky, like its gravitational pull is reduced. So one part of us wants things to be different, wants to drive the boat, steer our actions, steer our practice. We can call this the doer. And then there's part of us that doesn't need that doer to be different in any way. It's totally fine that that doer wants things to be different. It's not a problem. Of course it does. It's the nature of the doer. And so we're connecting with that part of ourselves. So for a few moments, let's just connect with the doer, that which conducts, controls, guides. The part that feels like the puppet master of our reality. And observing this without needing to be any different than it is. Noticing that the doer often feels like self. Feels like what we often refer to as us, me. We may notice how comfortable, how familiar it feels, occupying, observing the experience of the doer. Now shifting solely to the part of us that doesn't need the doer to be any different. We're generally referring to this as awareness. If it helps to use a labeling strategy, we can refer to this part of us as awareness. That which can observe the doer without it needing to be different in any way. Now noticing both together. At any time noticing which one we shift from or to, which position the system seems to occupy. A wide open, omnidirectional awareness, as though we were observing from the outside in. We might describe observing from everywhere or observing from nowhere. Awareness simply being aware. We might find that we're occupying the doing self. Again, it's not a problem. And we may notice that by observing the part of us that doesn't need the doer to be different, even if the doer wants things to be different, this can lean us towards noticing this awareness. And staying with the practice, staying in stillness, allowing a tiny bit of light to enter the eyes, eventually resting the eyes on one point as they fully open. And at this moment, simply knowing if we're occupying the doer, if we're observing the doer. Noticing we can observe even from within the doer, knowing we're in that place. And each of these is its own anchor, showing us both sides, both positions. Neither better, simply nature expressing itself. And allowing this moment, as we sit here with our eyes open, to be the great teacher, showing us how to bring this practice into every aspect of our life. Okay. Lovely. Okay, folks. So what was that like? What happened? And what do you like now? If you're just joining us or didn't catch the beginning, let us know where you're coming from. It's always nice to hear folks, hear who's here, know what's going on. If folks don't know, we have our co-host here, Nick. We're bringing back an old tradition where our top supporter is our co-host, our beautiful, neutral Planty McPlanterson, who we like to call Nick. And Nick has been our longest-term subscriber, so we really appreciate that. So, let us know. Who are you? What brings you here? Also, Tomlin, he corrected me recently. Tomlin, I think that's right. Tomlin told me that, he just posted the Discord in the chat. So if you want to jump into the jump into the Discord and chat with us, you can feel free. That means that we can chat and I can hear your voice and we can connect in that way. So feel free to follow that link and we can jump in and like that. So what was that like, folks? What happened? Okay, Liz, welcome back. Connecting to the doer provides a contrast between what it does and what is happening anyway. Yeah, that's great. So in a way, we could think that there are these sort of two sides of the motor function. So we can activate the body, right? So the body's activating itself through breathing or through, digestion, etc. And I can activate the body too. I can decide to move my hands, move my fingers. And we think that if I decide to do this and I decide to move my hand, that I'm 100% in control, that I'm just controlling this and that's the way it is. And you can try this trick. I always found this detail very hard for people to have direct contact with, so I'm going to show you this trick. Is take a moment and your middle three fingers and try to tap. Well, actually, that's not what I'm going to ask. Try to make your thumb reach your first three fingers on its own. So you're trying to get your thumb to move without getting your fingers to move. Now, you're not trying to hold your fingers still. The goal is just get your thumb to touch the tip of each one of these fingers kind of rapidly, one in a row. It doesn't have to be in order. Just do that quickly. And all you're trying to do is move your thumb. So notice the part of it that you're controlling. You're not trying to keep your fingers still, but the main movement, the main sort of part you're controlling is supposed to be your thumb. Just control your thumb, reaching out to touch the tips of these fingers. If your hand gets tired, you can switch. And notice that without trying, the fingers jump to the tip of the thumb rather than the thumb jumping to the tip of the fingers, because secret here, the thumb's not long enough. But the body knows how to do it. It just makes the connection for us. So there's the part of us that can control this. And if you want to label this, if you ever want to practice this, I like to call that do, just one syllable do for the doer. And then there's a part that we're not controlling, which I like to call go, because it's just a verb. It's just going. It's the automatic function of our sensing experience. So just noticing that there's part of our physical experience that we control and part that we do not. Fun little exercise. Thanks for that, Liz. What else? What else came up for folks? What happened? What on earth happened? And last time we were here, we did a little exploration of, let's see, did a little exploration of artwork in relationship to this, this material. And I want to go back. So I tried to set up a camera. I don't know if it's going to work this time, but we'll see. We'll see. Let me see this camera. Camera 8. A. Can I see pictures there? Without the being... Where are my pictures? Okay. So let me know. Any other reports before we begin jumping into this book, these pictures of art history? Let's see, can I even see this stuff? Yes, but it's upside down. And there's a cord in the way. Something in the way. Yeah. Colin, welcome, Colin. Oh my God, Colin, you're back in NYC. I got a message recently. I thought you were saying you're getting back Friday, but I mean, maybe you said you got back Friday. I would have reached out. Here in NYC, very nice to step back from the doer into awareness. It can feel really relieving because the doer has this sort of anxious, leaning towards gripping energy. And that said, over time, we can experience the doer. And I bet some people had this experience that the doer, when we're observing it and don't need it to be different, it actually itself can be very relieving. And we've talked before about this way the system teaches us through contrast, that when it shows you one thing, it can point to the other. So you might have noticed that when you know the two are there, when you look at the doer, there's part of it sort of pulling towards and saying, hey, there's something else. And that shows us and is pointing towards the awareness all the time. We just notice the doer, and that doer is sort of leaning towards and pointing towards the awareness. And the same way the other way. You can watch the awareness, and the awareness can observe and experience the doer. Lovely. Nick says, spent the entire time wondering what focus range object I should use for concentration. Settled on restful sensations instead of breath. Okay. Completely spaced out after that. Yeah. Sometimes we space. Colin was co-host before. That's right. Colin was co-host before I even got here. Thanks, Janusz and Tomalin, for providing this. Yeah. We were bringing back our co-host position, and Colin was absolutely our co-host for a little while because he was making very kind, supportive contributions. Let's see. Spaced out equals not in thought, but in the sensation. Okay, well that's different than I thought. So spaced out meaning like it was more spacious, maybe. Observing the sensation. Yeah, that's not a problem. It can get to a thing where we're just like so grooving out on the sensation that we're actually in a kind of distraction, but that is what it is. Okay, I'm trying to set up this ding dang camera so that it's not a big pain in the butt. Okay, one sec. I can't hear myself at this point, but you can probably hear me. There we go. Okay, let's see if we can get this to work. I also don't want to lose the chat, but I don't want to lose the picture. Oh, I'm not that important. I'll just cover up me instead of the chat. Okay, good. There's this. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So let's see if we can see this. Transfer is on. Okay. Let's see. Is this the right way up? Oh, but everything's upside down. Oh, that's what happened before. Right. Okay. I'm going to fix that. So we were trying to look at pictures last time, and we couldn't see nothing. How do you turn this sucker? Oops. Nope. Okay, one second. What the heck, y'all? How do you rotate this guy? Tomalin, do you know how to rotate a piece on Streamlabs? I do not. I'm missing this. I'm hovering around it and all that stuff. I can make it larger. Maybe I'll just go and change it in the settings. Activate configure. Click transform. Got it. Got him. Okay. I didn't know you had to. I thought you could just do it on the screen. Okay, we're going to transform this and 90, 180. There we go. Boom. Okay, there we go, folks. We're in like Flynn. Okay. Excellent. So today we've been talking about the doer and the non-doer. So I wanted to flip through this art history book because I'm starting to make a whole series on art history and its relationship to these meditation themes. And okay, here's a good one. Here's a classic painting. Let's see. There we are. Which angle? Okay, I have to hold it that angle. Oh, that makes sense. So this is a classic painting of a woman. Oh wait, Oh, it didn't transition. Silly me. Transition. Okay, so here's a classic painting of, let's see, where's the light source coming from? Oh, there we go. So this is a classic painting of a woman holding a dog, and I just got myself a puppy, so I truly understand this. And it's this funny thing of the way they represent the feet is like doing 1,000 of them, which I think is funny. A lot of doing going on there. But this is in the sort of cubist, deconstructivist period. So there's a lot of people really interested in that. Here's like some photography that's coming into the fore as people tracking the exact shape and size of a human, walking in that way. Okay, let's see. I want to go to some actual stuff that really makes sense as far as the doer, because all these are representations of the doing. Okay, actually, you know what's funny? Okay, I'm gonna roll deep here. You guys want to see some deep cuts as far as we're going to talk about doing? It's going to go way back. It's going to get very nerdy. This is about to get nerdy AF. Going back. Can we go all the way back? Or are we too late? Okay. I can't find... This is part 1, so where the hell is Cezanne? I feel like I can't find Cezanne. Okay, so we're going to skip all the way forward to Braque and Picasso. So let's do Braque because, Braque did it first. Picasso kind of like, rolled up on Braque. Can you see that? Okay. So this is a Braque painting. So I want to actually point at this because Cezanne actually, was the first person to basically look at something while they're painting and start moving around so that the angles and positions change of the object. And it was basically the birth of abstraction. Now, this is not Picasso. This is not Cezanne. This is quite a bit later. But keep in mind, they're not just sort of making this stuff up. This is often from observation. So they're walking around doing this, this painting of, it says fruit dish and glass. And when the angle is not right to make the composition correct, they move. So there's a doer sort of planted within this experience of the painting. So what it's doing is positing the painter as the doer. It's the one who's moving around. Now, the problem with that, which you might have already guessed, is that the observer, the what's it called? The specter. Who's the person who looks at artwork again? They're the viewer, I guess. The viewer is what was I going to say? The viewer is they're static. They're just sitting there observing, but they're observing it like a film, like it's all moving, but they're just sitting perfectly still. So that's a little bit of what's a problem, and that sort of comes up later when people begin to address that. Okay, Nick says, is Wacky Wednesday a thing now, by the way? Had a video suggestion, but it got lost in my massive headspace somehow. Yeah, Wacky Wednesdays is absolutely a thing. We'll absolutely explore various things for fun on Wacky Wednesdays. Today's a little bit of a wacky Monday, but we'll go from there. Okay, so that's one example of a doer, but it's positing the doer in the artwork as the person sort of collecting, gathering, changing, rearranging. Here's a Picasso piece, and right there on the front is an actual newspaper, and that was really, and I think the texture is like actual wallpaper. So it was sort of like recognizing like he is a real person in the world. He got a newspaper, he glued it on. He got some real textile, he glued it on, and it's just as glass in a newspaper. So it's a still life, but it's weirdly breaking the fourth wall to some degree. And that break of the fourth wall is an example of illustrating the doer. Okay, let's get some more. Oh, P.S. Okay. So early on, Picasso does, Cubism, and this Russian artist, Tatlin, comes in and is like, oh, no, I'm not interested. Or not, he's like, that's a good idea, but you've totally failed because you're still completely in the one-dimensional plane, and I want to bring the world to life. I don't care so much about this physical flat thing. So Tatlin, first he does this, which oops, the screen is up. Well, I'll skip the first one. I'll go to the second one, which is really intense, really beautiful. He creates this thing, and this is, got to remember, this is in 1915. This is right after the Russian Revolution. So this is a piece called anti-relief or counter-relief, and it's in the corner of a room, and it fully occupies the space it's in. And so we're now looking at cubism that is in the world. It's no longer in the mind of the viewer. This is actually physically changing the physical world, which makes sense that this might come out of Russia after the revolution, because it was a really revolutionary idea to actually affect what we think of as the real world and bring this sort of abstraction, this transformation of self, transformation of world into reality rather than just a representation. And that's a big argument you'll hear in artwork, is about representation versus the actual thing. So here's another example of some work this is from 1917, just 1 year later. We talked about this last time, but this is a very famous artwork by Marcel Duchamp. And we talked a lot about it last time, so we're not going to go too far into it. But this really gets into the idea of the doer, because he, just turned this urinal on its side, signed it, put it on a pedestal, and then submitted it under a fake name, R. Mutt, to an art show. They rejected it, to an art show that's supposed to accept any kind of art. They rejected it, so he took a picture of it, destroyed it, and then they are all, well, no, we've made a big mistake. So in this case, the doer he's pointing at is the artist, the creator in this way. And so this artwork solely lives in the mind. And that's an example of good conceptual art, because it exists in the mind of the observer more than it does in the physical world. That's an early example of very potent conceptual art. Okay, let's find some more doing artwork. Actually, a bunch of the stuff we did last time had a lot of doing aspect in it. But let's, okay, so this is 1921. This is more Russian, oops, I'm in the way. I could turn this way, it's more of a square. Okay, this is more Russian constructivism. So you can see that they're getting really radical. Well, 1921, we were like, painting flat, squares of color and that kind of thing. So they're getting pretty radical, bringing it into the world, because they wanted to create a more radical world. And, okay, the doer. Let's see here. Here's a counterexample. This is not the doer. This is sort of the opposite. This is the sort of illustration of the dreamer. And there's a lot of critique of this kind of thing, because it was, and this is probably pretty well known, this is Salvador Dali. And this is not about the doer. This is about a representation of the experience of the dreamer. So there's a sort of a doing in here, but it's really more of a representation. And in a way, we're sort of trying to bring the material into life. I don't want to say we're trying to. There was a progressive stream of folks trying to do that. And for me, that's very interesting. So I'm implying as though that was the sort of drive of artwork at the time, but not the case. Okay, flipping forward. Let's see. I keep seeing fun artworks, and I'm like, oh, I'll show that. So here's another example of sculpture coming to the real world that was very much in this sort of weird doing realm. So this is it's Brancusi from 1924. So this is really interesting, because it is a totally clearly an idealized representation. This is, I think it's the sleeping, what is it, beginner? Oh, the beginning of the world. Okay, never mind. It looks like, to me, it looked like a sleeper, but well, actually, I think it's meant to look sort of like a sleeping head, and it's also meant to look like an egg on this plane. I think the plane is glass. There's also a silver version of this. Forget it. So, but his making of this was very much, the physical making of this object. It was not like the pedestal disappears, which it normally does. It's very clearly carved bit by bit. So that's an example of sort of the process being exposed, coming to the foreground. Let's see here. What's another example? There's just so much artwork in here, and I'm cutting through lots of it. I'm just like flipping. I mean, you can see me flip if that's interesting. Let's see. Let's see, more examples of the doer. Not that, I don't know what that is. Okay. Oh, this is part 1, that's right, so we're only going to get up to, okay, so I'm going to crack open part 2, this is the next book in this whole series, because then we're going to start to get into more like, okay, the 60s and that kind of thing, where this comes way to the foreground. Okay, Thanks for bearing with me, folks. This is part of the idea, is just to have fun, like I might swing through. So here's some more Picasso. It's all made out of cardboard, very handmade. In that way, the sort of creator, the crafts person, is sort of brought to the foreground. Well, here's a very classic example. We talked a little bit about this in the class that we're doing. One of the big examples of the doer was these, paintings by Jackson Pollock, and these are splashed. They're made on the floor, and we talked a lot about these as a good example of like sort of mental abstraction, and that you need to observe these. You need to let go of linguistic sort of ordering to sort of see what's going on here. We talked a little bit about that last time, so I'm going to skip that. Some people say that more famous than those paintings is the Time Life article where they actually, or video where they actually filmed him making them from a piece of glass underneath. Actually, this is from that series, that Time Life thing of him making them. And so a lot of people say that his paintings are less influential than actually the making of images, which I think is interesting because he's the whole creator in that way. Okay, so then flash forward, you have in 1956, which is not that much later. I mean, almost immediately after Pollock is doing his, made paintings, we have people in Japan who are really kind of radical. This is a person walking through nine canvases, and it's called Passage. And it was just, people were just thinking of all these different ways to relate to this flat surface. So this person's literally just like punching their way through one after the next layer and then walking on, and that was like a really radical moment. The thing is, what's funny, interesting about this Japanese performance art group, that they could never really get away from the painting surface. There's this idea that sort of lasted at that time, that the painting surface is art, and if it's not a flat surface, then it's not really art in some way, which I thought was interesting. Let's see, and then we'll flash a little forward here. Here's some doing. It's less doer. This is Alexander Calder. He came up with a mobile, which we have in a million, kids' playrooms kind of thing. But he came up with the idea, and he actually asked Marcel Duchamp, like, what do you think I should call these? And without skipping a beat, Marcel Duchamp said, mobile. Because he's a French guy, and apparently in French, the second meaning of mobile is like transitory, like it's just like in fashion kind of thing, meaning he's like, yeah, it's not going to last, which I thought was an interesting critique in the name of it, but in English, not so much. Let's see. Okay, now we're getting into some territory here. So there was this radical group of God, what were these folks called? These are the International. I forget what the name of these guys are. Society of the Spectacle, Guy Debord. If anyone knows what I'm talking about, just let me know. Oh, the Lettrist International. Anyway, so there was this thing that they call industrial painting, which is really interesting. And they just made rolls of this painting. Here's them actually doing it, making these sort of rolls of painting. And they would cut them up and you'd buy it by the foot, which was sort of a big critique on artwork and a big critique on this stuff, but still making these sort of beautiful objects, which I think was a sort of interesting attack on the status quo in that way. And I just skipped over Robert Ryman because there's definitely some doing there, and I'm like, boring. I don't know, just me personally. Love the industrial painting. Which one? The industrial painting, yeah, it's like sort of a very funny idea, moment, movement. Okay, actually, I want to go back because, Frank Stella. Okay, I like this. Oh, nice. So here's Frank Stella. Okay, so this is 1959, so we're getting into minimalism, which minimalism eventually really, really emphasizes this idea of the sort of creation of the artwork. And so think about this. I'm trying to make it not glare because it's not quite that light. It's pretty dark. Okay, there. Let's say, where's the shadow? Okay. Anyway, just live with it. Okay, so this is a painting by Frank Stella, and you got to think of it in the context of like Jackson Pollock, like so much about the doing, etc. But he wanted to take away this idea that it was about the sort of soul of the artist, and this sort of, because some people said that thing about getting at the soul of the artist was very much just supporting a belief in God, which was, a lot of people were very critical of this idea because they just related it to our lack of rationality, which, I think today we have a slightly different view, although there's a lot of arguments to be made in both directions. So here is this painting. So one thing to know about the painting is that the stripes you see there are 2 inches wide, and the canvas itself is 2 inches wide, and he used a 2-inch brush. And so the premise is, exactly how he made it. There's no secret, there's no magic that the artist had. It's like you couldn't do it yourself. So it starts to enter into this idea that you could do the artwork yourself. You could make it yourself, which a lot of people are really mad at because they're like, I could do this myself. My little daughter could do this, that kind of thing. But part of it was to make the artwork more egalitarian, to make it so it wasn't just like this magic thing that only the very top of the people who had so much luxury that they could spend all their time honing their skill. And there's so there's something about this being a egalitarian process. And even the Jackson Pollock paintings were made from household paint, so there was this sort of commentary that was running through. And there is this, people thought that Jackson Pollock was a communist, and he was sort of labeled with that, and that was, he got almost in trouble, and then they realized his works are actually all about freedom, and so they paid for him to exhibit his works. The government paid for him to exhibit his works in Russia because they were so certain it would imply and impact this sort of sense of freedom. Okay, so some people have heard of Christo and John Claude, who are people who wrap buildings in fabric. That's kind of what they're well known for. They did the Central Park a number of years ago in orange fabric. And so here is one of their very first pieces, and they just stacked all of these industrial barrels. This is called Wall of Barrels Iron Curtain. So there's an implication there. So stacked these walls of barrels in 1961 just to block off this entire alleyway. And it's this interesting piece because it's very clear that this can't stay here. It's not going to stay here. So they're actually even now attacking the idea that an artwork, a lot of this is trying to redefine what artwork can be. So a lot of this is, in this case, they're saying an artwork is something that can actually go away, can disappear, can no longer exist. It doesn't have to be something that lasts forever. Even the Frank Stella painting is something that's going to exist in a museum. But this only exists in real life, and you could only be there. Now you can only imagine what it's like. Here's another example of sort of right next to it. They're making the same point I think I am. What was this guy? Tingley. And it says Homage to New York, and this was one of his early pieces, and it was a kinetic piece. And was this the one? I can't remember. It's auto-destructing piece, and it just was a kinetic piece that would move and change and like do stuff, and it would would this piece self-destroy? There was someone else who made pieces that would self-destroy. Anyway, if it's not the self-destroying one, then the doer is like, I'm skipping that one around the doer because I might be wrong. And I'm not allowed to be wrong. Okay, fun fact, slight doerness. This is still in the sort of realm of like beautiful, handmade, handmade artwork that's transcendent, made to be transcendent. Let's see if we can get a nice, clean. Okay, so this is an artist named Morris Lewis, and he was from Baltimore. He's one of the few sort of famous artists from, abstract painters from Baltimore, and he would make these in his kitchen, and he had a little tiny kitchen, and every day he'd tell his wife to leave the house because he needed to be alone to paint. It's very funny, like what a macho story this is. But he didn't have a kitchen that was big enough to paint these. He didn't have a studio. It was big enough to paint these, so he'd fold the canvas in half and paint one side and then the other. And these are just gravity drip paintings. So he'd put paint at the top, it would drip to the bottom, and he would carefully do one thing after the next, and create these big, beautiful canvases. You can still, this one is, which one is centimeters? Oh, okay, so it's like 103 inches by 173 inches. It's big painting, and they're really gorgeous. So that's just a little bit of a fun fact. I made him in his kitchen and kicked his wife out. A little bit of on the doing side. Let's see. Pop. So now we're getting into really weird territory, which is the happenings in the 60s, early 60s. Here's an example, Alan Caprow. And, things are getting more radical, getting weirder. And so this is the title for this is just happening. It's not even quite clear what's happening. I'm sure there's some record, but I think it's people eating, what is it called? Jam or jelly off of a Volkswagen Bug. And, it's 60s. Stuff gets really weird. But it's an example of now the audience member is no longer just a static figure on the outside watching and looking. They're now a live participant. So somebody comes to view this artwork and they're very much participating. So there gets this very theatrical sort of experience in terms of the relationship to the artwork. Here, I like really weird artwork, guys. I'm gonna admit something here. I like really weird artwork. That's sort of my tendency. This is an artwork by Namjoon Paik, who's actually very well known, and they've done recent big exhibition in what is it called at the Guggenheim, and this was really radical at the time. It wasn't like whatever, like he's just a weirdo. Like people think about different ways to make paintings, and he's critiquing Jackson Pollock because Jackson Pollock's like, oh, I just splash paint around and it's my soul out on the canvas, and so this is him. And the title is Zen for Forehead. He is an artist of Asian descent, and so I don't know if you can see this, but there's a bowl of ink. There is sort of a black thing of ink, and there's him actually drawing it here with his forehead. And then here's the finished piece. It's actually quite beautiful. It looks actually quite a bit like the Morris Louis work. So it's actually like, in a way, has a lot of art historical reference and it's very beautiful in that way. But this really was a radical thing. It's sort of like a intense, dark, sort of weirdly violent to painting sort of way of doing this, and it looks horrifying in a certain way. So there's something really interesting in the way that he's sort of attacking the sort of standard way of making artwork and saying, like, again, art can be something different. And look at that. Here's another example. This is I thought this was a different artist. Okay, this is Shigeko Kubota, and this is called, it's called Vagina Painting, and she is making a painting with a brush that is suspended from her vagina, which is also obviously very radical. And she did these live. This was a performance where people were watching. So those are, again, very radical. And again, people had a hard time stepping away from this idea of the painting. The painting was very important. And then let's see, there's a lot of examples like this. This is Herman Nisch had these sort of pieces. This is a little gruesome, so just so you know, we're about to look at something kind of gruesome. You can look away and I'll tell you when to look back if you'd prefer not to. This is a performance from 1963 called Action 4. And Herman Nisch, so he is basically like arranging and moving entrails. Now a lot of that on the background is actually paint, because he couldn't, the blood would actually look darker than this by quite a bit, but he would like do these performances where people come watch and he'd be arranging entrails. Now this is very German. Okay, I'm taking the picture away. You can look back if you don't like gross stuff. Very German in a lot of ways. It's sort of very intense and violent, and there's something about that. This was a very interesting social experiment by Valley Export, which is a pseudonym of this artist. And it's called Body Action, 1968. And she went into public in an area where there were all these sort of industrial workers, and just put a box around her chest and said, okay, you can go ahead and touch my boobs. And it was a very weird thing that people were like totally okay with it. They're like, oh, as long as we can't see it in public, this is fine. And she has this sort of wig on that makes her look, I don't know, maybe a little more domestic or something. And there's this weird moment where they capture a picture where she's making direct eye contact with the guy, and the guy's looking right back at her. And it's sort of very, this early 60s. So it's a very weird experience of, it's a very interesting feminist statement. It's a very interesting, sort of moment that someone could do this kind of experiment. And is, it says a lot of which apparently I'm not tapping into at this moment. So now we're going to get into some of my favorite artwork. Minimalism. Now, I don't like minimalism because it's minimal. I mean, I think that's fine, but it's also worth noting that all these minimal artworks that seem like they didn't really do a lot, like, oh, they just stacked a bunch of bricks, right? What the heck? They just stacked bricks? That's all they're doing? Like, they're also aesthetically really beautiful. They're really like elegant and slick, and there's something about them that's like, really stark in a beautiful way. Here's an example of a light bulb piece by Dan Flavin. You can see there's a very tall light bulb and then shorter ones on the side and that kind of thing. And it was just light bulbs, and people like freaked out, like, you're not allowed to do that. But a lot of it was, this artist, Carl Andre, who did the bricks, no one had ever really explored that part of space, the really low to the ground space of the floor. And so he was exploring that, and also in a way that would like sort of attack people to some degree and say, hey, you can make the artwork yourself. You don't have to wait for some higher up to do it. And people attacked that idea for so long that people today take it for granted, and they're like, oh, I could do that. And it's like, yeah, but the reason we feel comfortable with the idea that we could do that is because of people like this. So there's another piece that Carl Under did, which I think is called 15 Fire Bricks, and it's just the same kind of fire bricks stacked in a row, just one after the next, and it's just a long line on the floor. It's very stark, it's very beautiful. One end is touching the wall, and the other end is just sort of in the middle of nowhere. And it was a very well-known piece, and he was supposed to lend it to a gallery. He decided not to, a gallery in Europe, and they just were like, screw it, and they went out and got 15 fire bricks and made it themselves, and he sued them, which, he has the right to do because it's his artwork. And it's a very interesting sort of moment in art history, or just sort of art historical footnote that's really interesting, in that way. So, of course, one of the classic doers, right, is Andy Warhol. Let's look at these. So people forget that they think it's just an image, but part of the premise of all his work was that it was just like handmade, and it was like often very crummy, and often a lot of like indications of its making. And something else people don't tend to notice, they just think of him as like, oh, Mr. Fun, Andy Warhol, like Campbell Soup. After the Campbell Soup cans, I'm pretty sure it was right after that. Other than that, every single piece that he made often had some connection to death. Something about dying. So this is right after Marilyn Monroe dies. And, I'm totally getting off the doer thing. So anyway, I'm not going to get into some of the things, but basically the idea of the simulacrum, it's everything, a copy of something, but it's every part of that thing which is not the original. So it's taking away every part that is the actual thing and only showing the thin veil of what is recreated. So 1,000 copies of her face, like, where is she in this? And she just gets erased, and all it is the image. So he's pointing at that. Here's another one, which is his electric chairs. Right, so people forget that he was, wasn't obsessed with death, but all of those things, his pictures of Elvis Presley after he had a near fatal, or Elvis Presley with a gun is one of the things, those kind of things. So I'm going to wrap up here soon, but okay, oh good, we're getting into Bruce Nauman. I really like Bruce Nauman. So minimalism comes out in the 60s. Almost immediately, this artist named Bruce Nauman, who's still alive, who I love, comes up with basically like post-minimalism. So this is a piece that he made. So okay, let's go back for a second. Minimalism, many people interpreted it. This is a sculpture by Robert Morris. There are these sort of human scale, weird L-shaped things that he's also showing, like, hey, look, the ordering structure, this is very simple. There's one on its side, there's one on that way, there's one this way, and it really changes and shapes space just by taking the same thing and moving it around. So formally it's quite beautiful, but the pieces really were meant to do two things. One is sort of point to the figure, but also when a person is standing in here, which it's not just usually empty, when a person is standing in the space, it totally transforms the arrangement. So it's no longer a thing where you're just supposed to be a sort of floating eye looking at artwork, and it doesn't matter if it's you or someone else. It doesn't matter if a short person walks in here, it's a different artwork. If 3 tall people walk in here, it's a different artwork. And that was really radical. People hadn't thought of that before, that the artwork could be changed by the viewer. And you can see that it's pointing towards this idea that the artwork is really, really transformed by the viewer's experience, which you can see leading into more and more radical territory. And then I'm going to jump to Bruce Nauman, who I love. So he does this piece, very, very humble. It's just a cast from his mouth to his hand. In fact, maybe the other way around, and it's just called Hand to Mouth. And it's this weird statement about how basically artists live just hand to mouth. And so he's selling this piece of wax, cast of his mouth to his hand. and it's a very weird, it's hung at the right height, so it's like next to the viewer's body, so the viewer would like see this. Here's another piece. I think this is, oh yeah, this is an old piece by Marcel Duchamp, and I believe, is it cast? It might be, oh no, galvanized plaster. Okay, so this is a cast butt. I don't know if it's called what's it called? Female fig leaf, and I think it's a cast of a female, like in between her legs, and it's this weird object that points towards a physical body that isn't there, and it's very different than a bunch of cubes. That's not the kind of body that we're talking towards. Okay, I'll close out. Let's do one last one before we end this stream. I want to find a good one so we can really punch it up, land on a high note. Okay, moving, zipping through, because a lot of stuff gets really weird. And Chris Burden? Should we close on Chris Burden? So yeah, I'm going to close in the weirder direction. Okay, I was going to close here with Kusama, who is this artist who, so she was like certifiably mentally ill, and the only thing that really soothed her was like making this kind of weird art. So it's this room full of like weird things with red polka dots and mirrors, and she's like a red polka dot too. So that's some interesting stuff. But I'm going to end with flipping. Well, okay, I'm going to end with a piece that's not so famous. It's not even my favorite piece, but it's a classic example. Ana Mendieta was amazing. There's rumors, the guy who made the brick thing, there's rumors that he murdered her, which is terrible, but it's been unknown. So they used to fight a lot, and eventually she fell out of a window. Question is, how did she fall out of a window? So what's really weird, though, is a lot of her work looks like someone who fell out of a window, which is part of the conspiracy theories. Like, she looked like that when she died, and it was her trying to tell people that she was murdered, which is like, I don't know about that. But she would make these pieces where there would be traces of her body, and then let nature sort of take over. And so this is just, it's just called Untitled. And she would, of course, have these different ways of her body marking the earth, which you can imagine is a very sort of potent idea. And so she marks the earth, and then this sort of nature takes over, and this is sort of the beauty aspect. Not beauty, well, that's the word, but the sort of weird, alienated, and disconnected sort of form that points to the viewer, her experience, that kind of thing. Okay, so we're going to end there. Our artwork, focus on the doer. Hopefully that was fun. Hopefully it was a good time. Let me know in the chat. And of course, folks, we're going to be right back here in so few hours. We're going to be back here in less than 72 hours. It's going to be very fun. And I keep being very interested in showing more artworks. And looks like everyone's left anyway, so I'll just do one more. This is a piece by Felix Gonzalez Torres, and he didn't touch this himself at all. He instructed the gallery to get, I think it's, I forget, like 200 pounds of locally made candy, and then people can just come up and take one. And it's this very interesting, he was sort of like on the communist direction. He's an American, but there was a lot of big communist folks. This is in the 80s, 1990. And so the premise here is it's about, it's about peace and whole. So what makes up the whole, our society, the group, the collective? It's like many, many single pieces. And so when many people choose to take one little piece of this artwork, the whole disappears. So he's trying to show and create a relationship between individuals and group, and showing that as a group, you make something different than as an individual. And so people could just come and take a candy, and it would disappear, and then the gallery would resupply the candy, and it would be infinite. It would never end. So interesting piece. He died of HIV/AIDS later on. So there's this sort of always this relationship to this that's very, there's something really sad about it, because it's always about this disappearing, ephemeral experience. And he made a lot of his most important artwork after he realized he was diagnosed with AIDS. So folks, let me tell you something. That right there is where we're going to end this stream. Thank you so much for joining. Thanks for sticking it out. If you lasted all the way here, congrats. And we're going to say farewell for under 24 hours. So hopefully we'll get to see you back here again. Great to connect with you all, and look forward to seeing you soon. I'm going to throw on this ending music. Outro. Great to see you, everyone.